Hey guys, how's it going? In this video, we're going to go over some lectures from Module 1. So, essentially, what I'm going to do is supplement the material from the book with some, insights that I've picked up along the way. So, let's go ahead and get started. It's going to be a long video. All right. So, again, we're going to talk today about just sort of introducing marketing as a discipline and also thinking a little bit about strategy. So, chapters 1 and 2 in the book. So I like to kind of start off with talking a little bit about the evolution of marketing. So how it came to look like the thing that it does today. So most people, when you ask them what is marketing, their head is going to go to advertising or some sort of other promotional activity, like sales or coupons or retailing maybe. But it's pretty much, our thinking around marketing when we hear that word is usually around some kind of promotion. The thing is, marketing is much more broad than that. So, if you look at the AMA definition here, it's quite expansive. All set of institutions and processes for creating, communicating, and exchanging offerings that have value for all these different entities. So, a lot of stuff. But when you think about it, it's all the way starting at like what product are we going to sell and how are we going to talk to people about it and how are we going to ultimately deliver value. The definition I like a little bit better that kind of I think is a little bit more focused is this one on identifying customer needs and then attempting to satisfy those needs. So that is really the essence of what marketing is about. So I will say that this perspective of identifying and satisfying customer needs is really quite only been around for a short period of time. So it's like if you've ever been to like the Natural History Museum and you see this like huge stack of papers, and then the very top layer is like modern civilization. This is kind of what modern marketing looks like. For a long time, this experience that we have today with marketing and going to stores and seeing advertisements and seeing social media is quite new. So let's talk about how we got there. So the book has this version of where it sort of walks you through these different concepts from the production concept, where we're mostly interested in availability, to thinking about the product concept, which we're focused on products. Many companies still are in this sort of product concept stage where they're very focused on making stuff rather than thinking about customers. And so there's this term coined by some professor at Harvard back in the day called marketing myopia, and Theodore Levitt was his name. And basically it describes this condition that many firms have where they are overly focused on their products and not focused enough on the consumers, and that still exists today. The book says, talks about the selling concept, where we think about how we sell people things, and then the marketing concept, where we think about what people want in the first place. Instead of just making stuff and then figuring out how to sell it to them, we try to start with figuring out what they want. And then lastly, it adds this social marketing concept that as we've evolved, we've become so good at marketing that now we have, some environmental issues that we have to think about, and we have to broaden our consideration set of what we think about when we're designing our marketing efforts, not to just include the customer or the end user, but also other stakeholders. All right. So anyway, this is, another way of thinking about this, which I think I mentioned before, is like, you could sort of think about it around technology. So for a long time, marketing, it was just getting stuff to market. So getting it from where it was and could be produced to somewhere where it was available to buy. So creating a market for something. So marketing really has its origins in distribution. The next sort of innovation sort of came through with Industrial Revolution and being able to make products in a sort of standardized, repeatable way through innovations like the steam engine and the assembly line. And here is where, at this time in the Industrial Revolution, we see this shift towards thinking less about getting stuff from one place to another to like manufacturing stuff in a sort of high quality, error-free kind of way. And this perspective really dominated for a long time. So even in the, up to the 1980s, you see sort of management philosophies like Six Sigma and other ones coming out of Japan and other economies where they really focused on minimizing defects as sort of the end goal. So you have an R&D department that comes up with a cool new product. And they then figure out how to make that product with the fewest number of defects. The idea being that this level of quality is what's going to lead to success in the marketplace. And so this philosophy was around and sort of prevalent and sort of top of mind for managers even into the late 80s, when I think part of what drove this interest in this perspective was a lot of car companies from Japan were doing much better than the U.S. car companies because they were making higher quality, lower defect products. And their big excitement in business at the time was like, okay, how do we just minimize the number of defects we have? Because that's how we're going to win. And that was 40 years ago now, right? Modern marketing has only been around maybe for the last 30, 40 years, in that this idea is that what we first need to do is, okay, well, now we have products that don't have a lot of defects. Now we have to actually think about, do consumers want those products? And so starting with this idea of we need to find out, have this market orientation, or what's called the market concept, figure out what it is that consumers want and then give it to them. As it turns out, this is not a trivial task. And even today, a lot of the focus is, I would say, there's been a acceleration recently in really adopting this perspective, the idea that we can't figure out what consumers want in the back of the house at the R&D department and then give it to them. We're going to need to do some qualitative research. We're going to have to do some sort of agile development or lean kind of perspectives where we generate little prototypes and test them out and rework them in order to understand what consumers want. And this is sort of, and what we have as a result of this kind of perspective, you see this, I cannot say the word, where we see this explosion of different kinds of products. So we have in the slide here, however many different kinds of water on the shelf, how many different kinds of detergent, beer, all these things that trying to understand individual consumer, desires and give that to them. All right. So let's talk about, I noticed in this slide, we've highlighted the term needs. So let's talk just for a minute about needs. So, you probably have seen this at some point. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is the expanded version that also includes transcendence. It used to end with self-actualization, which was becoming the person that you want to be. Transcendence is a new idea that we're going to move on past that and help other people. But the basic idea of Maslow's hierarchy is at the bottom of the pyramid, you have things like I need to stay alive, so I need water and food. And once I have acquired those things, then I'm going to start worrying about also staying alive by being safe. And then once I'm fed and safe, I'm going to try to form social connections. And then I'm going to try to get status within that social group. And then once I have status, then I'm going to move on to, thinking about more aesthetic kind of needs, and then ultimately become the person I want to be. So the idea is, as we satisfy these sort of basic needs, we move up. So important to this idea of the marketing concept is that humans have these kind of basic underlying needs, and that's what we need to understand with our product, which one of those is actually being served with the product we're trying to offer. And as it turns out, it's not always that easy to tell. So as the book mentioned, we sort of maybe we're past this marketing concept thing, and now because we've created all these different products, 90 different versions of water bottles in order to satisfy unique consumer preferences. Now we have some environmental problems that we need to sort out. And so I don't know if this is a new phase or if we've just somehow cycled back to a new need that we need clean water and a clean environment in order to thrive. But It definitely, as you can kind of see, the evolution of marketing and business in general has moved sort of, we're starting to recognize that it's not just about serving customers and making money, but we also have to think more broadly about society as a whole. All right, so how this material is relevant. So if you are a marketing major, I don't know, I'm just sort of biased here, but I think you should probably want to have some idea about marketing and where it came from. Yeah, I did fail this question, or I had to retake this question when I took my PhD comps, the what is marketing question. But I did pass it the second time. So, but I do think it's useful to have this perspective. And I just think it's kind of interesting to think about that this world we live in with all 18 different flavors of yogurt is like quite a new experience for humans, and to understand that like this is kind of strange times really that we're living in with all this access to all this variety. And all right, so speaking of this, like you will sometimes hear people kind of bad mouthing marketing, like because you could make an argument that some of this marketing concept and market orientation does have some potentially negative outcomes. So things like environmental pollution, overconsumption, overspending, racking up debt, that sort of thing. So is marketing bad? Well, there's sort of two perspectives. So one is that you could say, well, the card you can play is, well, marketing doesn't actually create any needs. What marketing creates is wants. So this is a reasonably important distinction. You might want to kind of tuck away for an exam or something like that. So the needs are these basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs things. So it's things like safety and status and self-actualization and transcendence, right? Wants are marketplace offerings that marketers communicate to consumers will satisfy those needs. So, if you have a need for status, you might want to do this 90H2O bottle that comes in individually numbered water bottles and costs $15 per. Maybe that's kind of stodgy looking. So if you're at the club and you want to feel hip and cool, you might have Voss water. If you're at Starbucks and you want a little bit higher scale, but not like you're at the club, maybe then you have Fiji water. If you're just looking for the cheapest water, maybe you have the Walmart one. If you have kids and they don't only drink like 3 ounces of the water and then set it away, maybe you need these little bottles. Maybe if you're in that transcendence kind of space, we can create this boxed water for you so that you can, show to yourself and everybody around you that you're not going to consume single-use plastics. Like all of these things are essentially, manipulating what we call in marketing the 4 Ps, which we'll talk about in a minute, which are product, price, place, and promotion. So this is sort of one of those things like when anybody talks about marketing 101 or intro marketing course, people are like, oh yeah, the 4 Ps. Like this is the thing that people remember. There's some websites that dedicated to teaching intro marketing called Teach the 4 Ps. So it's just kind of a framework that it's just part of the lexicon of anybody who's taken intro to marketing. And basically, there are more Ps that we'll talk about later, but essentially by changing the features of the product, so I have, do I have it in these glass individually numbered bottles, my water, or do I have it in cardboard? Do I sell it at Starbucks, or do I sell it at a nightclub? Do I sell it at Walmart? Do I what kind of promotions do I build around it? Is it in all these different things? We can create these different wants out of a basic need for water, potentially. Or for an example of the expensive water, you might not really be serving a need of water. You might be serving some other need. All right. So I've been thinking about this. Another way to think about marketing sort of at a societal level. So if you were to, or at a market level, what in a sort of a capitalist sort of free market, what happens is that different companies develop different offerings to satisfy sort of these different wants, right? So, and this bears, if you look at this graph here, this graph is actually from revenue management. So revenue management is an idea that we sell our airline tickets 4 months in advance at a discount, and then 3 months in advance we know there's going to be more demand, so the price goes up. Then like business class, we know that those people don't buy their own tickets often, so we're going to have more price there for a slightly larger seat. And then we're going to have ones people that fly on Thursday or Wednesday, we're going to know they're vacationers, so we're going to lower the price for them. And people that are flying on Monday to Friday, we're going to suspect they're like consultants or for work. And so again, we're going to jack the price up for them because we know they are not price sensitive because they got to be there. And so this is this idea of tweaking the product slightly and offering it different ways to different people is often discussed under the heading of revenue management. But if you kind of think about it at a market level, not just that's usually when it's discussed within an organization. So an airline doing that, we would think about it as kind of revenue management. At a sort of market level, we see different companies finding spaces to offer different versions of a product. And the idea when this happens, you capture more value, more consumer surplus underneath its downward sloping demand curve. So if there was just one product at a medium price and a medium quantity demanded, you would get that shaded area. But if you can find a really high price that a few people want and a really low price one that some other people want and maybe kind of another middle one, then you start filling in all the area underneath this downward sloping demand curve with different products that are filling particular little niches that people are interested in. And this is ultimately what marketing kind of does is it sort of looks for opportunities to take something like a chocolate chip cookie that might sell for 10 cents an ounce at one level, but if I can sprinkle some protein powder in it and sell it through Thrive Market, now I can charge like 1,000% more than that. And so all four, if you've had these cookies, they all taste remarkably similar to one another, but they're sold and packaged and created in very different ways, right? And so this is the essence of like marketing. It's like taking something like water and adjusting the 4 Ps in such a way that it creates drastically different experiences, or taking a basic kind of chocolate chip cookie and adjusting the Ps for that in order to find these little gaps in the market in order to sell stuff at different price points to different people, and when it's essentially in many cases the same thing. In some sense, I think, to get, a deep thought here, like we need this kind of marketing in order to just have a capitalist market. So in a sort of theoretical market where everyone has the same amount of money and has the same preferences, you don't need all these you don't have this sort of invisible hand that creates all these different things. But in a market economy, you might have somebody that will sell a $500 million yacht to Jeff Bezos, which he just bought. It was just in the news the other day, so I threw it in there, with a carved sculpture of his new girlfriend on the front for $500 million. Or maybe back in the day of in early Amazon days before he was a super billionaire, Jeff Bezos might have taken a nice cruise with his friends on one of these sort of similar looking ships that other people could also be on. So, it's just so woven into this idea of like marketing and coming up with different products that are kind of similar but at different price points for different income levels. It's sort of woven into the fabric of just how we do things in the world these days. So, I don't know, deep thoughts about that. It's just like they're essentially connected. And I would say that, in case you're feeling bad about not having a $500 million yacht, what's sort of interesting about this kind of thing is that we have these, I'm drifting into consumer behavior a little bit, consumer psychology, but for many of these products, they suffer from what's called hedonic adaptation. So this week, Jeff Bezos' yacht, $500 million yacht, just launched or whatever, and I'm sure he's very much enjoying it, cruising around the Mediterranean or whatever. But the thing is, Humans tend to adapt to things very easily, adapt to good things, adapt to bad things, and sort of return to a base level of satisfaction. And so I would guess in a couple years, that yacht, $500 million, is not going to be doing the job it needs to, or it's not going to be giving Jeff Bezos the high that it is today, right? So this is where some of the potential problems with marketing come from, is this idea of hedonic adaptation, also sometimes referred to as the hedonic treadmill. So we get the new thing, it's really awesome, we really like it, and now we sort of adapt to and get used to it, and now we want the next new thing to get that next kind of a buzz. So this is, this water bottle phenomenon is one that I think is somehow closely related to this, right? So these, if you look at these water bottles, you'll see like these are the trendy water bottles. We had Swell, that was maybe the first insulated fashion water bottle that people, Gwyneth Paltrow and other people would have in their purse, and it was really cool, and you could get ones that matched your outfit and all this kind of thing. Then we moved on to the Hydro Flask and the Visco Girls. So my 10-year-old daughter had to have a Hydro Flask at one point in her life when she was like 7 years old, because I don't know what she saw on YouTube, but that's what she had to have. Yeti, another company near and dear to my heart, has their offering, which has its own unique backstory. And then, of course, the latest one is the Stanley mug, which everyone has now. Interspersed in there's some things like the Nalgene bottles that were hot back in the day, and last year it was the water bottle with the numbers on it that people would drink the water, had the little time stamps on the bottle. So this kind of, how many water bottles do people actually need? And I think this is where some of the critique of marketing comes in, is that this is probably a result of the hedonic treadmill, right? So the hedonic treadmill is, I'm really excited with my Swell bottle, but now marketing has created a new offering and told me that if I care about turtles, I need to have a Hydro Flask one. And so now I'm going to buy that. And then, maybe I'm, identify as like a outdoorsy type person, so I need the Yeti one. And then now the new, the Stanley, which was historically a sort of a blue collar working class brand, has become super hot for their, fashionable, giant mugs among young women. Like, it's just this is and part of this again is the marketing concept and market orientation, and also this idea of hedonic adaptation. And now my daughter is no longer as excited so much about her Hydro Flask. She really wants the Stanley one now at this point. So she's 10 now, so I guess she needs a new water bottle. I don't know. All right, so how this material is relevant. So I think it's useful to know that there are some critiques of marketing out there, and knowing what the sort of defense of marketing is, and that it doesn't actually create any needs, it just creates wants. But also recognizing that in creating those wants, which is part of a sort of a capitalist kind of economy, that we generate this because of hedonic adaptation, we have this process where we just kind of, people want more and more and more, and marketers are more than happy to give it to them. And so this is kind of, when you live and when you have a society where it has distributions of resources, marketers come in and they create products that are dedicated to people with different levels of resources. And it's just how it works. So anyway, moving on. Important to the marketing concept, again, is trying to figure out what need is being served. So we'll start off with an easy one here. So we have the Birkin handbags that are, thousands of dollars and are featured on rap videos and all that kind of thing. And this is sort of an older one, but back when the first iPhone came out, somebody had the bright idea to come up with the I Am Rich app. And the I Am Rich app essentially did nothing. It was just this floating screensaver jewel thing, but it cost $1,000. And actually, they sold 10 of them before someone complained to Apple, and they took it off of the, the store where you buy the apps because it was somehow offensive to people. But people were buying it. They were paying $1,000 so they could have a screensaver that proved that they could spend $1,000 on a screensaver. All right, so probably these in the Maslow's hierarchy are probably moving somewhere towards some kind of esteem or status kind of need that's ultimately being served, right? And so somebody came up with this product that essentially did nothing, but was an opportunity for you to spend a lot of money on something that did nothing, and that serves a need in the marketplace. The Birkin bag. So this article came across my news feed from the New York Times the other day, where out of China they're starting to produce like super high quality replicas of these bags that even like experts have a difficult time telling one from the other. They're like getting the same leathers. They're buying the bag and deconstructing it down to the number of stitches. And what is that going to do for the high-end purse trend when these sort of counterfeits start flooding the market? Right? Because people don't actually buy the bag for the bag necessarily, because what they buy it for is like the style and the, its ability to confer status. So if we flood the marketplace with enough counterfeits that it no longer can do that job, what's going to happen to this product category? Which is why luxury handbag manufacturers spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year combating counterfeits, because they realize that's ultimately the business that they're in, and it's a risk to their business. All right. See if you know the answer to this one. This is a harder one. So what is the need being served by Betty Crocker cake mix? Got your answer? Okay. So this is a famous marketing anecdote. Back in the 50s when this cake mix came out, it was in full powdered form. So it had powdered eggs, powdered milk, powdered everything. You just poured it in the bowl, added the water, whisked it up, threw it in the oven, you had a cake. So what they were selling was kind of convenience. Problem is, like their market at the time for this was, in the 50s, was probably a lot of stay-at-home moms and women who like prepared food for their families as part of being a professional homemaker, right? And so for these people, like throwing water into a bowl and stirring it and throwing it into the oven to make a cake for somebody's birthday or some other special occasion didn't really feel right. It felt too convenient and too easy and not just wrong in some way. So what Betty Crocker did is they sort of figured this out somehow. And what they did is they took the egg out. So you had to like get your own eggs and crack the eggs and mix it in and stir the eggs in. And then all of a sudden, by doing that, adding this ingredient that was sort of like baking, it felt like baking. And so then the sales of this thing like took off, because what Betty Crocker didn't realize is they weren't really selling. They were sort of selling convenience, but the product was very closely tied to arguably self-actualization. This is, people who saw themselves as caregivers. It didn't feel like they were caring when they were just pouring water in. So this, by taking out the egg, which didn't change actually the taste of the cake in any way, it just made it less convenient, allowed them to just ultimately get the need that they had was some sort of self-actualization need, probably. All right, here's another. Well, I'll just keep rolling with the famous examples. There's a fun study where some researchers put people into an MRI machine and they would squirt. They put a little tube in their mouth and they would squirt some Coca-Cola in there. Well, half the time they told them it was Coca-Cola, and the other half the time they told them it was generic cola. And then they looked at their brains in the MRI machine. And what they found was that when you told people it was generic cola, that areas of your brain related to taste and that sort of sensation lit up. But when you told them it's Coca-Cola, additional areas of your brain light up. So in particular, ones related to memory and other kind of sensory kind of regions. And so essentially what they sort of came to understand was like when you drink Coke knowing it is Coke, so when you drink the same liquid but knowing it has the brand, other areas of your brain light up. So the areas that you remember seeing polar bear commercials, or seeing the memorabilia that your grandma used to have of Coca-Cola stuff, or buying Coke at the movies or the ball game. All these sort of memories and emotions that are created through your associations with the brand also light up. So what's interesting is that at a physiological level, you experience the same chemical compound differently depending on whether it's branded or not. So you literally are drinking the brand, right? I don't know. So what need is being served? The need that being served by Coke is different than the need that's being served by just cola, even if it's the exact same formulation. Art. So this is another sort of interesting thing. We tend to think of art as being sort of aesthetic and buying it because we like it and we want to decorate our house with it or something along those lines. But interestingly, there's a class of art, or couple classes of art called blue chip and red chip art that have developed into sort of sophisticated investment vehicles. So the need being served here is not really aesthetics. People may buy them, may never even hang them up in their house, just store them away and then sell them again at auction at some point in time. So it's a form of sort of investment vehicle, which is sort of interesting. The need being served here. So Yeti coolers. I remember when I first saw a Yeti cooler back in 2008. I was in a boat store and they had a Yeti cooler and it was $400, and I was flabbergasted that a cooler could cost $400, right? So if you know the story, the product was there was these two brothers who did a lot of fly fishing on the flats, and which mean in the ocean, where you like to stand up high so you can see down in the water better and see the fish. And they would stand on their coolers, and they would go through a couple coolers a year, breaking the coolers because they didn't hold up. So they came up with this sort of rugged cooler that you could stand on and fly fish from. And because it was for people with boats and was sold in boat stores, and it was $400 for a small cooler, which was like unheard of at the time. And so what then it evolved into is you would start seeing these coolers gradually gain this cult following, such that they would be brought to like the tailgate, and because it's like, oh, what is that cooler? That's so cool! Like you can, it was such a novelty and it's so expensive. It had this like sort of status to it. One of my students used to say like it was like gifting a sorority girl a Yeti cooler was like the equivalent to like a pre-engagement. So they would do, like one of my students from LSU one time said they would have this formal, and the boys would bring the girls like a cooler, and the girls would pack it. And if the guy brought you a Yeti cooler to pack and decorate, you knew like things were serious, right? So all of a sudden, like you had this very functional fishing thing that has brought on this whole like status or prestige kind of element to it, and you would see these. The thing about it, a Yeti cooler, if you guys have one or ever tried to carry one, is they are heavy, right? They're made to stand on, so they are super heavy, and they're not so handy to like drag from your apartment to the game for tailgating. You don't really want to leave them around. You don't need a cooler that can keep ice for 5 days and can keep bears out of your Keystone Light. What you need is something that's like handy to like take a case of beer to the tailgate. So you guys may have heard of this Kanga cooler, which was developed by some Clemson students actually to meet that new need, right? So we went from being this sort of functional stand-on cooler that was Yeti, then we got this, and then other companies came in to like serve that need, like Arctic, and started undercutting them. Yeti then performs this like status need, but then the status need comes at such a cost of dragging this cooler around that other competitors have come up and like have this different functional need, which is like just taking a can of beer that you need to keep cold for 1 hour or 2 hours to a tailgate. So, it's just sort of a fascinating space, and how, again, we have this, marketing and sort of market economies, like just, trying to figure out what the need is. How can we satisfy that need? How does that need evolve? How do we come up with a new product to like find a different, sell something new to consumers? All right. So quick quiz here. Which is the need and which is the want? Well, the need is so there's a famous quote, I think it is also by Theodore Levitt, maybe, that people don't want drill bits, they want holes, right? So they don't really need, or is it they don't need drill bits, they don't need holes. So ultimately, nobody cares about drill bits. Drill bit manufacturers care about drill